So put your head under the covers. Have you ever done that? I have. I think many of you were alive when I had this experience. Maybe you remember the book Amityville Horror, a long time ago. The one and only scary book I read, and you'll find out why. So you might know the story. It's about a house in New England, and the house is haunted. So I was sitting in my living room as a young woman in high school, and my parents lived in northern Arizona in a kind of country house. They had lots of huge big windows and a fireplace and creaky wooden floors, and my parents were gone. And so I thought, I'm going to read this book. So I'm reading the book, and if you know much about the book, it is also, there's a fireplace plays a predominant place in the book, and terrible things come out of the fireplace. So I'm reading the book, and I get to the part in the book where these bad things are coming out of the fireplace, and some wind must have blown down the fireplace, and the fire kind of, oh my. So I jumped up, ran, shut shades all around the house, tried to put the fire out, ran around, turned on all the lights, and then I ran into my parents' bedroom. I'm not proud of this, and I crawled in bed, and I put the blankets over my head and waited for 3 hours for my mother to come home. So I'm sure none of you have ever heard a noise or been home by yourself and said, oh, I'm just going to run and cover my head and hope for the best. Probably that's just me. But I know sometimes I think about that today. Sometimes I think about doing that in my life, that if I could just hide under the covers, cover my head, that would be a good thing to do when I'm afraid. And I think that's what the psalmist, I did that last time too, the psalmist thought about doing. He was involved in some really scary things, and you heard some of them. He had people after them. He had people lying about him. There were armies camped around him. His very life was in danger. And so I would imagine he was just thinking, if I could just put my head under the covers, I'll just hope that this all goes away. But that's not what the psalmist did, right? He decided, I can either live with confidence in the light, or I can be afraid in the dark. I can have faith, or I can live in fear. I can have faith, or I can live in fear. Now, Aaron, I really didn't even need to preach the sermon because you did so great with the kids. I was like, oh, I could just go home now. But that's the reality, right? I can have faith, or I can live in fear. Now, some of you may be familiar with this show. This is one of my favorite shows from a number of years ago, because I'm talking about being afraid. Anybody have an idea? Fear Factor. Did anyone ever see that on TV? I'm not proud that I was really fascinated with it, but I was. And the Fear Factor is each week they bring a group of people together and they conquer their fears, okay? And these are fears of heights. So there might be people on semis going down the interstate and they're standing on top of the semis. Nothing you should ever actually do at home. Fear of snakes. Fear of being closed in, like you're in a box and they put the lid on, and then they put the snakes in. Fear of crawly things. Fear of eating the most disgusting things you've ever seen. And what I thought was really fascinating, it's as if we can get rid of our corporate fear by watching other people overcome their personal fears. I mean, I felt like that really was what this show was about. If we watch people overcoming sometimes some pretty crazy fears, somehow that makes us feel like we can overcome our fears as well. I was really fascinated that that show went on for a long time. But what I really wonder is, how do we face our fears? Not how do we watch other people on TV do it, but how do we face our fears? I want to tell you a tale of two horses, because I am an animal lover, and I do even have a stole covered in animals. And I want to tell you the tale of my two horses. In high school, I had two horses, Brownie and Tommy. Brownie was, probably you would guess, a brown horse. Okay, so just a plain brown horse, nothing fancy. He was a good guy, a little choppy to ride, but just a really good horse. But he had a lot of energy. And he was like the Energizer Bunny. So he would just keep going. No matter what, that horse, no matter what you asked, he would do it. He never stopped no matter what I asked him. And I asked him to climb some pretty big hills in northern Arizona. Now, Tommy was also a quarter horse. They were both quarter horses. But he was like this cute little quarter horse, pretty face, something you might see on a horse calendar or something online, just the prettiest horse. He was great to ride. He knew how to do, if you're a horse person, some pretty advanced horse things. He was able to do dressage like you see in the Olympics. He was an amazing horse. So one day, my friend and I took these two out riding in northern Arizona to the little Colorado River, and we were going to go swimming. So we take them in the water, we're swimming, we get out, and we come on the sandbar. And as we step on the sandbar, the horse began to sink. So it was more like quicksand. And as they began to sink, of course, my friend and I panicked. And so I tried to get the horses out. So Brownie, my horse, the one that never stopped, he fought like crazy to get out. He was thrashing around, and I encouraged him, come on, Brownie, you can do it, you can do it. And he pulled himself out. Tommy, on the other hand, just laid over and closed his eyes. And I was, of course, panic-stricken. How am I going to get this horse out? No amount of pleading or yelling seemed to move him. You see, what I discovered as I grew older was Brownie was afraid, but he trusted me. And because of that, he could use his fear to get free. His fear was useful because he trusted me. But Tommy did not trust me. I hadn't had him very long, and his fear literally paralyzed him, and he gave up. Literally, Tommy just decided as a horse he was going to put his head under the covers and hope for the best. For Tommy, it wasn't a failure of nerve. It was a failure of being able to trust me. So I think about the scriptures this morning, and I think about Peter. Peter doesn't have a failure of nerve, right? Peter is the guy. He's always like, we know from later on in the story, he cuts people's ears off, stands up, challenges Jesus. I mean, he does some good things and some bad things, but he's not afraid. So we come to the story where the loaves and the fishes have happened, and Jesus sends them away, the disciples, because he's going to pray. So they're out in the boat. Peter's with them, the wind and the rain. You all know the story. It's crazy. And Jesus walks across the water, and the disciples go, oh my gosh, who's that ghost on the water? Okay, they were having a little Amityville horror moment, right? Who's that ghost? And so Peter calls out, if you're Jesus. Now, why, if they thought it was a ghost, you would think it was Jesus? But he did. If you are Jesus, command me to come to you, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to walk right across the water. That's a gutsy move, right? If you want me to do it, Jesus, I'll do it. Now, what a bold step of faith. But what happened? Jesus said, come on, Peter. Peter stepped out, and then he had a moment of panic. He began to look around. He thought, I imagine, doesn't say this in the Bible, I could drown. I could blow away. I could be hurt. Nobody walks on the water. What am I thinking? And he begins to sink. So when he took his eyes off of Jesus, when he got distracted, then all was lost. See, I think Peter and the psalmist show us that we all have fear, right? Fear is normal and it's healthy. And if you say you don't fear anything, one, I'm a little concerned about, probably you're not being honest. And two, if you literally don't fear anything, I don't know, that is pretty normal. We all fear things. There are things we should fear. But it's what we do with fear and the place we give it in our lives that matter. It is what we do with fear and the place we give it in our lives. It is okay to be afraid. It is how we are made. There are things we need to be afraid of. But it's what we do with it and the place that it holds in our lives. Fear really is not about how nervy we are, how confident we are. It is about how trusting we are. Ultimately, it's about, do we trust God? Do we want to live in the light, or will we live in the dark? Will we put our head under the covers and just hope for the best? So because I love animals, I want to tell you one more story. Her name is Kiana. She was one of the cats that I had. Now, I apologize if you don't like cats. You'll just have to go along with the story. If you love cats, it'll be a good story. So she was a cat that I found at a rescue organization, and she was one of those kitties that wanted to be rescued desperately. So her little paws would come out of the cage, no claws, just paws to grab you. She would meow and talk to you. She would do somersaults. She was a pretty amazing cat. So she did somersaults in her little cage. So I thought if anybody works this hard to be adopted, I should take them home, right? So I took her home a number of years ago, and she was this amazing cat. We had her about 6 months, and we went on a trip for like 3 weeks. And so she was great. Pet sitter said she was amazing. We came home, and she began to urinate on everything that belonged to me. Now, those of you who know cats, you know they do stuff. So trying to be a good cat mom and not thinking she was just being a bad basket case, I took her to the vet. And the veterinarian said, tell me about her. And I said, well, I know I'm the second person who's rescued her. She was rescued once. They had her for 3 or 4 years, and they brought her back when they moved. So she had been abandoned. And I was telling the veterinarian this, and she said, you know what? Here's the problem. She's afraid. She's afraid that you will abandon her. And it was true. She didn't know me enough to trust me. She just did not know me enough to trust me, and then she was afraid. Now, the good news is she learned to trust me, and she quit doing that terrible behavior, and she became the bravest cat I've ever known. One time when I was living in a parsonage, they were working on a second-story window, and I looked out of my office, and she's climbing out the window down a 2-story ladder. Just like, well, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. And she was fearless when it came to dogs. She met my big Weimaraners I have now, and she walked right up to him and was like, bring it on, girls. Yeah, so she was one fearless cat. She realized that I cared for her and that she could trust me. So my cat and my horse was not so different than all of us. When we are afraid, we all do some pretty strange and maybe even destructive things, don't we? To ourselves and others. Because our fear makes us often either close up or lash out to other people. So sometimes the things we do that we're so afraid of just so limit us, hurt those around us, and hurt ourselves. So I want you to think for just a moment. I want you to think about what is it and who or what you're afraid of. So just take a moment. If you're okay closing your eyes, you don't have to, but I find it helps me kind of go inside a little bit and not be so distracted. Who or what are you afraid of? Is it someone at your workplace, your supervisor? Is it the future? Are you afraid for your kids or your grandkids? Is it railroad tracks? Is it storms? Is it spiders? Is it your health? What are you afraid of? Who are you afraid of? And then I encourage you to take those things, those people, and give them to God. And you may have to do this over and over. I wish that it wasn't I wish it was a one-shot deal. Here you go, God, and I'm good. But it's a practice over and over to give your fears to the one who you can trust. You can trust because God cares for you. So you can open your eyes. And here's what I want to tell all of us and remind myself. Next time you want to put your head under the covers, here's what I encourage you to do, metaphorically or really, is throw those covers up. Throw them off. Sit up and shout out loud or in your head, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I be afraid? The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I be afraid? The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Will you pray with me? God, we know it's nothing, that you love us. God, help us, as John Wesley used to say, help my unbelief. God, help me stand here until I feel it. God, help me believe and trust until I do. And give us the strength to do that, to trust you no matter how small or how large our fears are. May we live in the light and not allow darkness to overcome us because you love us. Help us, God, we pray.